compete against other Untitled players in Untitled Tuesday. Battle your way to the top in Arena Kings on Wednesdays. And finish the week off each Saturday with the blistering Community Bullet Brawl. All happening in the Community Club on CEST.com. Looking for new ways to enjoy chess? Check out our schedule of CEST.com community events today. Mondays, play Rapid Opening Roulette and expand your opening repertoire with a new opening each month. Tuesdays, compete against other Untitled players in Untitled Tuesday. Battle your way to the top in Arena Kings on Wednesdays. And finish the week off each Saturday with the blistering Community Bullet Brawl. All happening in the Community Club on CEST.com.
Hello and welcome. I'm Grandmaster Nils Grandelius, and I will be joining and overseeing today's opening roulette, because today's subject is the Ruy Lopez, the Spanish opening, and that's one of my own personal favorites. So I thought it would be a nice opportunity to join in today and play some games and look at some games, and just in general enjoy such a nice opening. So we'll see how it goes. It's my first opening roulette, so also the concept is pretty new. So yeah, let's simply see what happens. But yeah, so the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish, I think there is actually no difference. It's just two different names for the same opening. It's of course one of the most famous and popular openings throughout the, let's say, almost entire history of chess, at the very least for the last like 150 years. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I also personally quite enjoy it. Because I mean, one of the nice things with chess compared to many other sports or games is that we do have this very long history. It's been played for many hundreds of years, and playing an opening that sort of can highlight that is always very nice, I think. And like, let's say if I'm giving lessons, for instance, or studying the Ruy Lopez, maybe not so much for myself anymore, but when I try to teach someone else the opening, I can easily make use of games played by, for instance, Steinitz 150 years ago. And that's, I think, basically the only sport where that is possible. So yeah, that's a nice thing with the Ruy Lopez. Also, I think in general, when we are studying chess, when we are trying to learn more about the game, it's very important to let's say try out many different, for instance, pawn structures, many different sort of let's say type of games. And for that, actually, the Ruy Lopez is also very very good, because there are so many structures that can arise. So you will learn not one structure. Because, for instance, let's say you play some very specific opening, like let's say you play the French, then already on move 1, black plays e6, and then almost inevitably follows up with d5. And the number of structures that can arise, it's like either white takes, or white bypasses with e5, or white lets black take on e4. So there are 3 structures. Whereas in the Ruy Lopez, I guess we will also see it today, later on in all the games, that there are so many ways. I mean, we can get a Sicilian structure, we can get the King's Indian structure, we can get an open center. I mean, we can get black can be playing with double pawns and the bishop pair. White can have double pawns and the bishop pair, for instance. I mean, there are so many imbalances and so many possible structures, which makes it a great, I think, choice for developing your understanding of the game in general. And I'm always like suggesting or advocating for people to play the Ruy Lopez with both colors, but especially with white, when I try to give advice on how to improve in chess. And also, of course, I should mention that I do have a course myself out on the Ruy Lopez. This was my first chessable course, and the one that, let's say, was closest to my heart, where I spent the most, let's say, put the most effort in. I mean, of course, all of my courses are serious work, but the Ruy Lopez, it was my first. It was special. I spent many months, and I was really trying to not so much, give the right lines and have deep analysis and such, but I was really trying to understand, trying to explain as well as possible what the opening is about. And I was focusing very heavily on, like, not what we should do, but why we should do what we do. And this question why was like in the Ruy Lopez, which is so rich for both sides, it's a big question why. So yeah, that was a big and very interesting project for me, which I think also helped myself as well in my chess. So and of course, yeah, I should mention that I'm going to read I'm reading the chat as well. I have it open here. Jesse has a question if I'm going to play in the Banter Blitz on chess.com. Yeah, I saw. I mean, I'm not, to be honest, following too much what is going on in the online chess world. But I did see, of course, that Jan Gustafsson played Banter Blitz, which, of course, was a big thing when he invented it, or maybe he didn't invent it, but he popularized it on Chess24. I would say almost 10 years ago, maybe. Not sure exactly about the dates, but many years ago. And it's been a thing ever since. And yeah, I always thought it was a nice concept. So, well, if they invite me, maybe maybe I will do it. But yeah, I don't play too much online in general. So yeah, this is a little bit of an exception today, because it's such a nice opening. So we have 1 minute until the start of the event. So the event, it's 10 minutes per game. Actually, I forgot how many games, but it will be 2 hours. So yeah, I'll play a couple of games. Maybe I will then at some point switch to watching other games if I find it more educational, let's say. So we can try to learn also from each other, and of course giving some comments. I will try actually today, like a Banter Blitz, for instance, in general is of course mainly trying to be entertaining. But today I will try to keep it educational. But that's my primary focus today, like to try to explain as much as possible about the opening. So hopefully it will not be let's say too boring, that I'm not emphasizing the entertainment value. What will I play with black? Yeah, actually, I did play quite a lot of Ruy Lopez as black as well. I mean, after all, in some sort of objective sense, e5 is the best move against e4, and then you will have to inevitably be ready for the Ruy Lopez. This is what White will play the most often. So I will probably try a few different things, which is also what I did in my own game. So let's start here. By the way, when I speak about the Ruy Lopez in general, and I speak about these factors, why it's such a nice opening and so on, I am speaking about the lines where we don't take on c6. The exchange Ruy Lopez is a valid choice. It's a real opening, of course, but it's not like this richness that I so love about the typical Ruy Lopez. It doesn't really exist in the exchange because White is settling the structure from the very first moves. So yeah, my opponent goes for one of the systems with an early b5, but normally b5 is combined with the move bishop to c5. And here he is mixing, or they are mixing a little bit two plans, I think, because normally when you play an early b5, it's because the bishop wants to be as active as possible. And if black plays the move bishop to e7, then usually this move b5 is delayed a little bit. But it probably doesn't matter much. Now I play a4, and I play a4, okay, to attack the pawn on b5, but also because black did not play d6 yet, which means that black cannot, black is not in time to play bishop d7. And here, well, at least I'm basically what I'm trying to do is I'm creating some tension on the queen side for black. Let's see. Here, for instance, bishop a4 can become a little bit of an issue, but I'm really expecting black to play d6. That's by far the most common move. Yes. Now, if I play bishop a4, white, black can simply collect my pawn. But now we get this sort of slow position. What I have done by playing this move a4, forcing the pawn to b4, is that I have gotten a nice square on c4 for my knight. So my knight can jump here next, and it's quite hard for black to get rid of it. And later on, my plan will be to play something like c3, again, fighting against this knight on c6. And this is actually one of the main, is one of the fundamental, like very, very, let's say, yeah, very fundamental things in the entire Ruy Lopez. It is that this knight on c6 is hindered by a pawn emerging on c3. So this pawn here, it controls these two squares, and the knight on c6 is then in some sense dominator. Right? It's a little bit of a bad piece for black. And that also explains why my opponent did move the knight backwards in order to free up for the c pawn and also to put the knight on a better square. Now with the knight gone from c6, generally speaking, black has a little bit less control over the center, which means that as white, we should try to push for d4. So d4 normally can be a bit risky because the pawn is weak, but with the knights having stepped away, then d4 makes sense. But now my opponent took drastic measures to prevent it, and therefore I will try to play a little bit slower. I will play knight c4. Basically, this knight is now very, very nice. Let's see. So what does my opponent want? He wants to take the pawn, so I'm simply defending. And yes, this knight is actually also not so bad on b5, but it's a little bit further away from the action, I think. Now, so my knight, I think, on c4 is a little bit better than the knight on b5. So let's see. Now it's time to be a little bit careful. For instance, if I move my bishop to c2, then there are ideas with knight takes e4, tactical ideas, because if I capture, then the knight on c4 is hanging. So here it's very important to keep everything defended, to keep everything protected. Now my opponent decided to take on c4, giving up the bishop. And this is one of the things that I'm not too happy about from the black side, because here now this bishop on c4 is very, very strong. Actually, as a kid, when I grew up, I was studying many games of Kasparov in his book Fighting Chess, and there it was mentioned numerous times There was a lot of talk about how Kasparov utilized this strong light squared bishop in the Ruy Lopez, and I think this is true still to this day. Here, this unopposed bishop will be a major factor for the rest of the game. And now the question comes, what is the next step? I have a nice bishop. I have this nice square on d5. But how do I increase the pressure? And there are a couple of different ways. One very natural one would be to just try to double or even triple on the b5. Another, which I'm quite tempted by, is to move this knight and then try to play for f4, or even play knight h4, try to get the knight to h5. But at the moment, I'm a little bit skeptical, because as soon as the knight moves, then black is able to possibly break with d5. So I'm making a non-committal decision, just putting the rook to d1. What is my opponent? Is he Irene IM? Yeah, I'm not sure what is AIM. I think it's just his nickname. Let's see. h6 is reasonable to prevent knight g5. Now I will try to continue with my plan of simply doubling or even tripling on the b file. So this and this. And here also I have this tricky move queen a2, putting some pressure on this diagonal. So now, for instance, if it's my move, I have this tactical idea of bishop takes f7, which would win material, because on the next move I would be able to make a discovered attack. So yeah, basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make use of this strong bishop on c4, which is unopposed, and also in general try to like play on both sides of the board. And this is, I think, when like, for instance, chess coaches, they talk very often about how important the Ruy Lopez is for the understanding of the game and the development of a player. It's quite often connected to this concept of playing on the entire board, because the Ruy Lopez in general is one of the openings where you most commonly do play on both sides of the board, like on the queen side and the king side at the same time. And you can learn that concept very well by playing and studying the Ruy Lopez. And it's a very important, let's say, concept for strategy in general. And here I'm got a little bit confused. Actually, I could still have taken on f7. Not sure why I didn't do it, but I found another idea to attack the rook. And if the rook moves to a7 or c7, then I can play c4. And then this pin, which is what happens now, this pin on the b file will win me a piece. It's okay, my opponent is fighting, but it's a clear extra piece, so it should be relatively smooth sailing from here on. Someone played a nice Ruy Lopez recently, Muhsin. Yeah, could be. They are playing a tournament in Sharjah at the moment, and there are basically in every tournament on high level nowadays, there will be games with the Ruy Lopez, because it's simply such an important and good opening. So here I'm simply a piece up. I think this will be at least this should be a matter of relatively straightforward technique. Not where, let's say, we have left the realms of the Ruy Lopez some while back. Like, this is now just a random middle game position, I would say. And of course, with an extra piece, it should be pretty smooth. my opponent is trying to win the pawn on a5, but as I have an extra piece, I don't care that much. I will try to go for some tactical ideas like queen c1, threatening the pawn on h6. Not so easy to defend. And how will I break through? I still have to make up my mind, but basically, yeah, I have a couple of ideas. Knight h2, knight g4 to increase the pressure. Actually, in general, my feel like now I have an extra piece, but even without an extra piece in such a position, one of the things that always comes to my mind is this knight on f3 to think, can it be improved? Because, well, the main weakness for black is the square on d5, and currently the knight is 4 moves away from it. So a very, very common idea is to move the knight, let's say, here, then to g4 and e3, and finally to d5 to this very, very nice square. Now, I did give back the pawn, but with an extra piece. It should not matter too much. I want to go here this way. I could also go via f1 and then e3, but I want to go here because then I might also attack the pawn on h6 along the way. So I will sort of gain a tempo. Now I think it's time to trade a bit. It's one of the usually the cleanest way to make use of a material advantage is to just trade as many pieces as possible, because the counterplay will eventually disappear. So that's basically what I'm trying to do now. Actually, my opponent has some ideas with queen b5 to attack the pawn, but hopefully, yeah, it should not be too worrying. I think I will simply defend with queen f1. And the problem is that this passed pawn on b4, it will never ever move. So this bishop basically cannot really be attacked. Am I playing the lines from my course? Yes, I will be definitely playing the lines from my course. That's the goal. On the other hand, every second game I will be playing black, so I will have also to fight against my course. We'll see how that goes, but yeah, in general, I of course want to prove that my course is still working for white. Let's say, so that's the plan. My opponent is trying something like rook f8, putting some pressure, but yeah, hard to get too much activity when you are down a piece. I think I'm not sure what the cleanest way to do this is, but one simple way should be to simply trade off that knight. Actually, if it takes, I could also take on a8, but no need. Better just recapture. A question in the chat from Chess Lover that there are so many chessable courses on the Ruy Lopez. What separates or distinguishes my own course from all the others? I think the main thing that separates it is the emphasis on explanations. That's really the main. It was the main goal when I created it, and I still think it's the main difference. So basically, I have really been trying to go very, very deep into explaining all the moves and all the reasoning behind them, and yeah, just try to make the people studying the course understand much more, not only about the specific opening, but about I would say actually chess in general, because the Ruy Lopez is an excellent tool actually to do that. It's so rich. There is so much that can be learned that also applies to many other pawn structures, many other openings. As I mentioned in the introduction, it can become a King's Indian style position. It can become Sicilian style position. It can become a completely open center. It can be somewhere in between. So like you have this possibility to learn a lot about many different sorts of chess, and that's why I have really emphasized the explanation part of the course. I think because any good course will have good lines and good moves. That's not very difficult nowadays with strong engines and so on. So the difference is not very big. But yeah, this explanation part of it is, I think, a huge difference. And I think, to be honest, also much more relevant for studying, because there is no it's a thing that everybody says all the time, so it's a bit, let's say, you might have heard it too many times already, but it's so important and it's so easy to forget in the moment. And that is that the important thing is not to know a lot of theory. The important thing is to understand why. The question why is always the most important thing. And yeah, it's worth saying it time and again. Okay, now my opponent is he keeps fighting, but the extra bishop, of course, is going to be the deciding factor here. Actually, this bishop on f6, the king on f5, the king on f6, and the pawns here, here, and here. It reminds me very much of one of the most famous Ruy Lopez games ever by Karpov against Unziker in the Olympiad in 1974. So if you haven't seen that game, if you haven't studied that game, it's perhaps the most famous Ruy Lopez games ever. And it also really highlights a lot of the fundamental strategic things of the Ruy Lopez. So Karpov Unziker 1974. Excellent, excellent game. A must see for everyone. Actually, not only playing the Ruy Lopez with any color, but actually everyone playing chess in general and trying to learn about strategy. Yeah, I think and that like studying some old material, of course, the opening moves will be outdated, but importantly, the ideas will most often be the same. The let's say strategic part of the opening play is not changing too much. So definitely not wrong to use also older sources. They can work quite well. Just you need to brush up on the specific moves a little bit more. But any good, let's say, opening material should definitely include a lot of explanations about middle games and sometimes even end games where relevant. So now my opponent is playing actually my own recommended setup, the one I recommend in my course. All right, it's very flexible, and as we discussed in the previous game, a lot is connected to the fact that this knight is now dominated by this pawn. My knight cannot really move forward. So I'll make a waiting move. And this is something very interesting because it looks very natural to play d4, but white should be careful. Sometimes it's a good move. I mean, I would even go so far as to say that it's quite often a good move, but not always. And the main reason why sometimes it isn't is that these two pawns might get a little bit vulnerable. So my idea here with black will be to take and then play the move bishop to g4, putting pressure on this knight. And if white recaptures, then the pawn on d4 is hanging. And it's not so easy for white to defend with bishop e3, because then this pawn is hanging, because the rook no longer protects it. So that's why if we go a little bit back, here in such a position, very often you start with h3 before pushing d4, because then there is no bishop to g4. So this is a little bit, I think, to overstretching white's position. It's a little bit early to advance in the center. Also, how is it justified for white to not develop the queen side? Well, white is going to develop the queen side eventually. This knight goes to d2. Then very often it goes to f1 and g3, actually. And the point with having this knight on g3 is that it defends the pawn. Then eventually white will be able to push and have these two very nice pawns in the center. And the reason why it's justified, why you can delay developing for so long, is that it's very hard for black to open up the position. It's very hard for black to break the central situation, and therefore you don't need the remaining pieces that early in the game. And that's actually a good point in regards to what my opponent did with pushing d4 early. Why I said that it's probably a bit early. Partly because white did not develop these pieces yet. And then if you are behind in development, which white actually is here, then you should generally not open the position. So I think white actually misjudged it a little bit there and opened it a little bit too quickly. Because, yeah, then indeed my development advantage could become a factor. But this is all very, let's say, I mean, it sounds nice when I say it, but chess is also a very concrete game. And if I have no way to, let's say, attack the center quickly enough, then it doesn't matter. Then white will simply be better. So we also have to take each situation into like specific account. Here I'm a little bit skeptical actually to what I'm doing myself. And the reason is that very soon, not at the moment because the queen is hanging, but very soon this knight will come here. And then this square on c6 will be very, very weak. So I'm quite worried about a knight landing on c6 quite soon here. So what to do about that? The reason my opponent made the last move is to push b4, kicking my knight away, so I will have to move it. So now it's possible to play g4. That's certainly the ambitious way to play. My opponent chooses something else. Also very reasonable. Winning this square on c4, which is similar to what I did in my own game. My own previous game. Actually, knight b3. I was expecting knight c4, but knight b3 maybe also makes sense. Here I will make a move. Will I make a move? No, I will actually take it first because I don't want the knight to go to d4 again. This square on c6 is so weak. And now there is a question. What should I do? I want to play knight d7 and knight c5. If I could get those two moves, I would be very happy. But I'm very worried again about this g4. Am I worried about that? Nah. I'm worried, but I'm not sure that my opponent will play it. Because also g4, it does, I mean, weaken the king side a bit. Very often, actually, white is able to push g4 in the Ruy Lopez, precisely because it's very hard for black to get enough pieces over to the king side. Like, for instance, here I have the bishop, but it will have to go back. Then it's hard. I can bring this bishop here. It will be good looking. But like these three, the strongest of the pieces, they struggle to get to the king side. So very often white is actually able to push the pawns on the king side. It's even the plan. For those of you who play the King's Indian as black, this will not be a big surprise, because in the King's Indian, black also pushes their pawns in front of their own king, like g5, f5, f4, g4. That's the plan, despite having the king here. So now I think, unfortunately, my opponent forgot about the pawn on e4, because here it looks like I can simply take the e4 pawn, and that's a very, very important pawn, obviously. It's a central pawn that I'm picking up for free. And not only that, but now my knight gets this excellent square on c3. The d5 pawn can become a little bit weak, and all my pieces are now very, very active. I will take, actually, what should I do? Here I'm looking for the simplest way to play. I think maybe just take and play knight c3 to get this strong knight. And I also did it partly because I spotted a tactic which I thought was quite nice. That is, if white moved the queen, I would have traded rooks, queen takes, and then the move knight d1, which is a very unusual square for the knight, but it would attack the queen and the rook on b2. So that would be a nice fork. White actually wisely stepped out of it, but now on the other hand, I won the e file, so I still have an extra pawn, but I also have very nice pressure. So this is something that with a bit of experience you will get used to in chess. It's the fact that if you have an extra pawn, it's very often, or I would say almost always, better to keep one extra pawn and the initiative, like I have here with e file and so on, than to try to win a second pawn but lose the initiative. So here I have full control and I have full initiative, and I'm also one pawn up. But if I would be 2 pawns up and white would have counterplay, then I would have to be very careful, and things could easily go wrong. So for a computer engine, this is not true. They want to usually grab as much material as possible. But for a human, keeping control, and then this one pawn will definitely be enough, because the second pawn will come much later. So yeah, very important to always keep nice control. Bishop g5, bishop takes c1, and bishop takes f3. Yeah, that's one of the ideas. Like here, already here, I think I had many moments, but one of the ideas with knight d7. Now I put the bishop here, which is very nice. But another idea is to go here, or take first and then go to g5 and then trade on c1. That's a very common idea in this structure where white has the pawns on light squares in the center, because then the dark squares will be weak. So this pawn on light, same color as the bishop, which means this square, they're all very nice for me. My opponent is trying some tricks, I think, here. Let's try to prevent it. Queen e5 check. I want to take with the queen on d5, because then I'm trying to force a queen trade, and getting a queen trade while winning a second pawn should be enough. The endings with 2 pawns up, they are usually quite easily winning. So yeah, things went a bit wrong for white. I think the main point was when the pawn on e4 was lost. So yeah, here I have to be careful because I don't have any luft. So if the queen could appear somewhere, let's say b8, I would be mated. But I don't see how the queen enters. So I'm going for a checkmate on h1 instead. Actually, I could also just have taken the bishop. Not sure why I didn't do that, but this should be good enough. If white prevents the mate, then I can take the bishop next move. Tapesno Chess Clitoris. Hello, how are you? Are you partaking in the arena, or just following, trying to learn something about the great opening Ruy Lopez, or Spanish? Yeah, my opponent is thinking here, but it's yeah, a little bit too late probably. I think I will play one more and then try to go through some of the other games from the tournament. I'm playing one more because I want to get white one more time. It's nice. Then I can try to advertise my course even more. So let's see what is. Yeah, my opponent is now trying to prevent both these threats, but there is no really good way to do it. So yeah, what happened actually? I think, yeah, white, basically, I think there were maybe a few different moments to do it, but the main thing that cost white the game is in a position such as this, the white needed to, let's say, dare to play g4. Let's go back just quickly to see. Let's say here, there are a couple of different moments, but this is one of them. Dare to play g4, kicking the bishop, and then after bishop g6 to go knight d4, and then there is this square on c6. But also this bishop on g6 is very, very bad, because white can even stabilize with f3. Yes, it looks a little bit area around the king, but with this bishop on g6 not getting out, then simply the bishop might end up out of the game for the rest of the game, and combined with the knight coming to c6, then white has full stability, will be able to slowly increase the pressure later on. So here I would have to try something funky, try maybe some sacrifice or something desperate, but I think white should be doing very well. So white didn't dare this, and then I had time for this regrouping with bishop knight d7, bishop f6, knight c5, and after that I should be doing very well. Bishop takes h7. Actually, this was maybe an interesting attempt, trying to get perpetual check like this, which I didn't see. But it looks like I can simply go up and then play queen to g5. Here, king g6, check, and this move, and there are no more checks. But definitely, I should have tried it. Also, I mean, if I got really, really scared, I could also move the king, and the mate is still there. But yeah, worth to try it before resigning. So let's go to the one more game. Then I will try to have a look. But now, now I got black again. Okay, let's try the same. Of course, there is the Berlin, but I actually, I never played the Berlin in my life. I think, in general, in high level chess nowadays, there is enough Berlin games and enough Berlin players. We don't need to see more Berlin, to be honest. So I don't think, at least, that's not what the chess world need. My opponent plays knight c3. Usually they castle first. That's the main line. Knight c3 is possible. White, it seems like white is delaying short castle, maybe in order to do something on the king side. Now white castled, so now there is no difference. But it can be an idea. I saw trying to castle long, basically, later on. What should I do here? Let's play c5. I want to play bishop e6, knight c6, and get control over this square. But maybe c5 is a little bit too early, a little bit too committal. Hard to say. h3. Now, this move h3, this is something actually that is not so typical for the Ruy Lopez, but for the Italian, more common. And that is that h3 very often makes a lot of sense. We also talked about it in the previous game. But before black has castled, it's a little bit risky to move the pawn, because I might start some attack with g5, g4 later on, which is actually something I will try in this game. I will play f6, bishop e6, queen d7, maybe long castle, then use this pawn on h3. And the reason why this thing is very important, it's something we call a hook, the concept of a hook. And basically that means that we can hook our own pawn into the opponent's pawn. Let's say a different explanation would be that the contact between the pawns, which is what is necessary for the position to open up. Like if we want to open the structure, then the pawns need to disappear, and they only do when they are in contact with each other, or some sacrifice, but that is a little bit different. But here it takes me one move, two, and then we have contact. Then some pawns will disappear. But if the pawn is back on h2, it takes 1, 2, 3, so that's one more. But importantly, for me to be ready to play g3, I would need a lot of support. I would probably need the other pawn here, and even then white will be ready to take twice. So basically by creating this hook, white makes it much, much faster for me to open up in front of the king. And that's why white already needs to prevent g4. But here I'm making use of the fact that I have not yet castled. So here I will play. Now white played something interesting, which I kind of understand, but also it's very risky, because white is just saying, I never want to allow black playing g4. and I want to keep it as blocked as possible. But I do have the possibility to open up the H file whenever I want. And also this square on F4 is quite weak. So it's understandable, but it's also, how to say, it's a little bit of a sign that things have already gone a bit wrong for white, I would say. What's my favorite game I played with my repertoire or with my course on the Ruy Lopez? Actually, I played a game with Duda, I think online 2 years ago, in one of the Berlin lines. A very nice, an interesting line where you sacrifice a pawn and get a nice initiative even into the ending. And that game, actually, I included in my most recent course, because the Ruy Lopez is my first chessable course made in 2021. First and biggest, arguably also best. I don't know. But my recent course, which actually hasn't yet been published, but will be published, I think, pretty soon, because it's all done and recorded and so on. It includes a couple of games. It's a course on dynamic play. And one of the model games of the course is my game with Duda. Basically, the course is a middle game and end game course, or let's say strategy course on dynamic play, on sacrifices especially. I think the official title is Playing with Dynamic Compensation. So we sacrifice something, and what do we do thereafter? And that's the main topic. And yeah, for that purpose, this game with Duda was an excellent fit. So yeah, that's one of my favorite games that I played in the following my own course, let's say. Let's see. I haven't been talking too much about the game because it's unfortunately not so much related to the Ruy Lopez, because my opponent played another line. But basically, what I'm trying to do is I look at where the king is, and then I try to open up as much as possible. So here, for instance, I'm giving up this pawn because it's another open file in front of the white king. And without really calculating, I'm more, let's say, just assuming that there will be some very dangerous attack coming. And also this extra pawn, if white is to utilize it, would have to be in some ending, and I really don't think this game will go to an ending. Another game from my course. Let's think. I remember once getting an almost winning position against Nihal Sarin. For those of you who play a lot online, this name will be very familiar. It's one of the Indian prodigies. Of course, very, very strong Grandmaster, but especially known for his online play. I beat him actually, to be honest, quite easily 2 years ago, or in one of the lines. He played a quite provocative system with G6 and Bishop G7, and I showed why people generally don't do it, or why it's considered a little bit too risky for black. That was another, not that perhaps difficult, but very convincing win. But there are many games. I played so many Ruy Lopez games with both colors that it's hard to pinpoint exactly which ones are the best. So now I play this move c4. It looks like I'm blundering a pawn, but my idea was to play bishop c5 and pin the king and win some material on the diagonal, win an exchange, basically. So now instead, white's wisely stepped out of it, but stepping into this file as well. So yeah, I'm basically just trying to get as strong an attack as possible. Now, white actually took with the queen, which is was a little bit of a surprise to me. It looks very, very risky, but on the other hand, yeah, it's understandable, because taking with the pawn would also have been quite ugly. But here, yeah, I'm making these moves like I'm systematic. Let's say first I gave this pawn, then I give another pawn with c4. Now I gave a third one with e4. And it's all in the same spirit that it's all about the white king, it's all about the attack, and then the pawns, they are very unlikely to matter. So basically all I need is open files for my pieces towards the king. Here I'm thinking a little bit, because white, I guess, will take with the f pawn, and then I have to make up my mind. The reason I'm thinking is I didn't yet decide, should I take utilizing the pin? If white takes, then queen takes, and white cannot recapture. But if I take, then there is rook f7, some intermediate move, very easy to miss. And yeah, looks to me a little bit too complicated. Should be good, I guess, but I'm not entirely convinced. So I will go here, creating these two very strong pawns. And actually, I thought white would have to take and give up an exchange. I thought that was the only chance. But okay, bishop c3, trying to keep the material. But yeah, basically, like sooner or later, it will just something will happen. Something bad will happen to the white king on the G and H file. Maybe I will play f3, maybe e3. This pawn, yeah. It's very much based on feelings or intuition rather than concrete calculation. But yeah, the material investment is so small. It's only one pawn that it simply has to be very, very strong compensation. Let's see. Now I have this move, quite interesting. Attacking the pawn. Maybe that's what I will do. Yeah, I think because I want to take the pawn and also to take the rook. It was, of course, tempting to play e3, keeping the strong pawns, but then at least white gets some light square blockade, which is what I want to avoid. So I'm trying to keep control of both the light and the dark squares. That's basically my idea here. Will I be able? That's the question. Maybe I will anyway be forced to play e3. There is also bishop e3. There's also takes, and then bishop e3, but yeah, I think I will just go here. If I'm allowed, I will take this on the next move. And if not, well, this pawn is my main target. So let's see. I'm expecting queen f3, but queen f3 allows knight h4, also not so clear if that is what white wants. Maybe something like queen e4 and then queen c4 or queen d3, but like as soon as this pawn moves here, like as soon as I'm able to do that without blundering the pawn, I think it just comes crashing down on white. I think it should be game over by then. So now white took. Did I miscalculate here? Let's see. I think maybe I thought I would just have something immediately. And the question is there something here when giving up this pawn compared to before when I was sacrificing on intuition? That was, I think, the correct thing to do. Giving up this f4 pawn, I should actually have calculated in advance, because now if nothing happens, then also this pawn is weak and white has good chances of surviving. So here, I still think there is something, but I should have seen it in advance, basically. But yeah, let's say he goes queen d4, the most natural move. Then bishop takes h2, and no matter how white recaptures, knight f3 check will hit both the king and the queen. And other squares, they don't look too appetizing. Also should mention, if white takes on e3, then bishop c5, and this pin wins the queen. Yeah, a little bit of an odd game for the Ruy Lopez, at least how I traditionally view the Ruy Lopez or play it myself. But yeah, it's one of the perks, of course, of the opening, that you can yeah, play so many different structures. Okay, so he probably missed knight f3 check, because now there is no way to avoid the loss of a queen. And that should be it. Let's. I was just briefly considering, is there some fast mate like takes queen f3, rook h8 mate, but the bishop is covering, so I think I will have to go for the boring way. Now takes. If he takes, then check and checkmate. I am from time to time doing Pestle Rush, so I am very familiar with these sorts of mates. I'm practicing them from time to time. So, hey, thank you for the game. Let's go to the tournament. Maybe watch how the others are doing. This is the current leaders. So let's see how you play the Ruy Lopez if you are leading the tournament. A d6. D6 is interesting because normally I know it's one of the main lines. It's, for instance, recommended by Gavin Jones in his lifetime repertoire for black against the Ruy Lopez. The idea is to prepare a square here, but also sometimes to prepare bishop to g4. And now h3, I think, is a little bit inaccurate because of what black did, b5, bishop b3. But here, there is one big problem for white, which I, in my course, has repeated so many times. It's one of the key things that you have to keep in mind at all times when playing the Ruy Lopez, and that is that this bishop should always have a retreating square. And here, oops, I'm not too familiar with. Yeah, here black could have played knight to a5. And this bishop would like to retreat somewhere, but it cannot. And if it goes forward, then simply c6. So black would be able to trade the knight for the bishop and win the bishop pair. Not so clear because white still has some play in the center with d4, but still should probably not be allowed. Instead, h6, short castle, knight f6. It makes sense. Now there is no knight g5. That's the reason for h6. But here, it seems to me like white should have a decent version. Bishop e6, that's another quite interesting strategic decision, because it gives white the chance to double the opponent's pawns with bishop takes e6. But it's not always clear whether that's a good or a bad trade for both sides. Because yes, double pawns are in general weak, but black is capturing towards the center. Black is getting rid of the sort of eternal problem of the square on d5, which we saw in one of my first games. If black recaptures with the pawn on e6. And also there is an open f file, which can be used for some counterplay. So it's definitely not, let's say, a mistake from black. It could be that it's not the most accurate, but it's not a mistake. This structure is perfectly reasonable. But white decides to refrain, and now comes a move that I think is quite nice. I'm not, let's say, 100% sure about the timing of the move, but the idea is very nice. And that is the move knight to h2. And the reason is what we have seen in some of the previous cases, that actually this knight on f3, with these two pawns here, very solidly guarded. They keep track of the center, and then this knight is not doing too much. And by playing knight h2, it can reroute. It can come to g4, for instance, putting some pressure on the king side. But also, it could come back here and then go to this weak square on d5. So knight h2 is an idea that we very often should keep in mind. Takes d5. That is always the downside of moving the knight away from the center. With the knight on f3, then this pawn would be weak. But probably white has quite some initiative. White won a pawn. I'm not sure about all of the details here. Probably black had some nice compensation, but here, yeah, it looks like a clear pawn up, and we are leaving the realms of let's say the Ruy Lopez. It's not so interesting for us whether white will convert or not. So which was this? Let's see. What are the other games? Here we have another game with the line bishop c5. Very interesting. It's quite rare. Normally, like it's a bit more traditional for black. At least it's what I have been doing quite a lot recently as black is to play first a6 and only after bishop a4 to include bishop c5. But here, yeah, black played bishop c5 immediately. Oops. I have to stop doing that. And white anyway took on c6. So this probably was not the most accurate. Generally speaking, you wait for black to play a6 before taking on c6. Takes, short castle. This is a very interesting structure that arises from the Berlin very much, but it's a structure that I avoided in my course. Instead, I wanted to keep the knight on c6, play the pawn to c3, try to dominate the knight and play more slowly, trying eventually to build a center. Here, white is playing for the better structure, the more flexible structure, trying to jump around with the knights. It's a little bit of a different game. Now black played f5, which to me feels a bit early. White has castled, black has not, and black is not close to castling. So, as we discussed a little bit earlier, opening up the position is, in one way, yes, it's natural because you have the bishop here, so you want to open. But here it's more important to get your king into safety because you can have as many bishops as you want. If you get mated, the game is lost. And if you open up in front of your own king without development, with the king in the center, you are quite likely to get mated. So d3, knight f6, takes. To me, it looks like white could have collected a pawn. Instead, played more cautious with bishop e3, bishop d6, and we are, I think, again beginning to leave the realms of let's say traditional Ruy Lopez. Knight c3, short castle, knight h4. Here, I would, as white, be very tempted to play, let's say, knight g5, put the knight on e4. But yeah, not so important, not so much related to the Ruy Lopez. So let's check one more game. Again, this move d6. This is this is actually quite funny because when I made my course, I will actually switch. I'm so much more familiar from the white side, but yeah, when I made the course, the Ruy Lopez course on Chessable, actually for this move d6, I almost completely neglected it because I just wrote that okay, white will play d4 with the pawn on d6, the bishop is locked in, and black is going to get a passive position. White has a nice advantage. But then my editors were pointing out that it's actually one, perhaps the most popular move on club level because after all, it's quite natural to defend the pawn on e5 and try to keep developing that way. But as we will see in this game, white did not play d4 immediately, but it will become very similar. Knight c3, bishop e7, and white played d4. And the problem for black here is that there is pressure on the pawn on e5, so you're not really able to keep the pawn on e5 for a long time. Like you would like to castle, but then already bishop takes c6 followed by d takes e5 might win a pawn. So black generally speaking needs to take on d4, and this is also the reason why it's so useful to include a6 bishop a4, because if that is included, then while black has the possibility to play b5, breaking this pin against the knight on c6, and therefore the pressure on e5 becomes much less relevant. But here, in this situation, black had to take on d4, and now, as we can see, white has control over, let's say, 4. 4 rows and black has control over 3. Let's say the 5th row is contested, like a bit mixed, but it means that white has a space advantage, white has more control, and that is almost always leading to a nice advantage. So bishop d7 here. There are many ways to play. You can move the knight, you can just play something like rook e1. Like the white decided, to settle black with the double pawn on c6, which also makes sense because now white ensures the better structure for a long time. Not like a big advantage, but very pleasant, and definitely not what you should aspire for as black in the opening, like to have a slightly more passive position, slightly less space, and also a small weakness. That's a bit of a sad outcome. That's why you normally refrain from playing d6 so early on. Here, it's not, I mean, white is better, that's for sure, but it's not so bad if you play, let's say, rook e8, bishop f8, play slowly, maybe utilize the b file. But black went for some tactics with knight takes e4. And it's one of those rules that sound perhaps a little bit abstract, but they are very often true. That if you have a bad position, then generally speaking, tactics will not work out in your favor. I think this is one of those cases. Here, white could have taken twice on d5. I'm not sure why they didn't. White could also play bishop d3, takes and take back with the bishop, and then these two bishops would be very nice. Instead, white played this, and after c6, now actually black looks to be quite okay. But yeah, taking on d5 would have been a very nice extra pawn, very nice and solid extra pawn. So that's probably the end of the, let's say, opening relevance for us. Some questions. What is the painting behind me? It's actually my girlfriend made a painting. My girlfriend has painted it. It's after a known Danish painter, quite well known, at least in Denmark, Kvirum. So yeah, it's homemade, but it's very nice. Yeah. Okay, so let's have another game. I will start one myself. Then after that, we can continue follow others. My opponent plays a6. Okay, bishop a4. And d6. So it's what we saw before, but a better version, basically. There is no doubt that the inclusion of a6, bishop a4 is working in black's favor. And here in my course, I'm recommending the move short castle. And here there are many moves. There is knight f6. There is also bishop d7, recommendation of Gavin Jones. Excellent course from the black side. But knight f6 makes a lot of sense. And now I have to decide how I want to play, because I can, for instance, take on c6. I can also play more slowly, for instance, rook e1, defending the pawn on e4. And after bishop e7, I'm very happy to play this move c3, making sure that there is no b5, knight a5 to trap my bishop. And we reach actually a position that I played with black earlier in the tournament. And again, yeah, the main issue for black in these sort of positions, it is the fact that this knight on c6 is a bit dominated by the pawn on c3. It cannot move forward. And also black would really like to get more control over the center with the move c5. But that cannot be done because the knight is in the way. So most probably, or usually, black at some point moves the knight, let's say, to b8 or to a5 if my bishop goes here, and then pushes c5, but that costs a lot of time. So here, you can spend hours debating whether you should start with h3 or knight bd2. But generally speaking, h3 is the most flexible one. Here it doesn't matter so much because black has played h6. But if the pawn was back on h7, you do keep the option of sometimes developing the bishop. Generally not something we want to do, but from time to time it's a useful extra option. So with that logic in mind, I could perhaps have saved on the move h3, but okay. And here, this is one of the things with the Ruy Lopez. Like black played this move bishop e6, which is, I mean, it looks like a very natural developing move, but I think it's actually a little bit inaccurate because the bishop very often wants to go to b7 in case of b5, and also on e6 it's a little bit in the way, to be honest, because rook e8, bishop f8, black wants to put pressure on the e file. This is especially irrelevant if I push d4 and black takes, then the e file is open. But also if black at some point pushes d5, then it's also useful to have this pawn defended. So therefore, actually, the bishop is not doing so much on e6, and it's a little bit in the way. So not the most accurate of moves for black. I could consider to push d4 because with the pawn on h3, I feel quite ready for it. Black cannot take and play bishop g4 because I'm controlling the square. But I could also play slowly, put the knight on g3, make sure everything is defended, and then later on push d4 instead. Rook b8, little bit too deep for me. Could be that if I at some point take, the rook is useful on the b file. Could also be to play b5, but that was possible already because there is a pawn on a6. So maybe black is just trying to make fast moves, putting pressure on the clock. Bishop f8 is a good move because it opens up for the rook. Here, with the knight already on g3 and the pawn on h3, actually developing with bishop e3 looks very normal. But it's a little bit the same story that as with the bishop e6 move, that the bishop is not actually doing that much more on e3 than on c1. So it's better to keep it on c1 for the time being, keeping the rook defending the pawn on e4. So I think I will simply go d4. So having the knight on g3 and the pawn on h3, it's generally a sign that it's time to break in the center. And the reason, as I explained earlier, that there is no longer any bishop g4. b5, very natural. I'm not going to b3 because I don't want to give black the opportunity to trade. I want to keep as many pieces as possible. I want that because I do have these two pawns in the center, so I do have the space advantage. And with the space advantage, you want to keep the pieces because the opponent's pieces will be stepping on each other's toes. There will simply not be enough space for all of the opponent's pieces at the same with such limited space. So having a space advantage, definitely try to avoid trading pieces. Now, the most natural move, as soon as this knight moves, is it a5, is it b8, wherever it goes, is to follow up with the move c5. c5. But here, black is in a slightly unfortunate spot that after d5, the bishop is attacked, but also the knight on b4 is trapped. So next move, after the bishop moves, I would play a3, and the knight on b4 would simply not have any squares. So that explains bishop to d7, but then black no longer has time to play c5. So knight c6. Now, yeah, this would have been much nicer for black if the pawn was already on c5. So here, the first reaction is always to play d5, but very often here you can use the fact that everything is nicely defended. There is such nice control to keep black guessing a bit, because maybe e5 is what we want. Maybe it's d5, but why not keep the opponent guessing for a while? Here I'm already, actually, to be honest, with the knights here, and these two bishops, I said especially with the bishop on c1, that the bishop on c1 feels like it's already developed. And that is because it has the potential all the way towards h6. So I'm actually calculating here already something like e5. And if the knight moves to d5, then either queen d3, queen c2 to give mate, but actually e5, knight d5, bishop takes h6 is a tactical idea that is very, very important. G takes h6, and then this queen c2 or queen d3. And then it's very hard for black to prevent the mate on h7. Because without the pawn on g7, like black took on h6, no longer possible to play g6. And those are the ideas why the bishop, for instance, on c1 is already developed. So I'm not entirely sure that it works. It looks very close, but maybe also no need, so I will not do it. But I'm mentioning the line because it's something that we should very often consider in this opening. So bishop d2 I play to prevent knight a5. Maybe the bishop can go to c3 to support the center. And also it's opening up for the rook on c1. But it's a very small and not... It's not a great move, let's say. Like the bishop is almost as good on c1. Now black stepped away with another piece further away from the king, which makes me even more tempted to play the same idea with e5. Or even prepare it with queen c2. Okay, let's say I go e5. Now if knight d5, it shows why maybe bishop d2 wasn't such a great move after all. Because otherwise I could just take it. But here, knight d5, I would be able to take on h6 anyway. Yeah, so now we have to calculate. Can I take here? G takes. I move my queen. The knight is hanging. Let's see. f5 is the only move to keep the to keep everything blocked. And then do I have a mate? It's it's very, very close, but I cannot see it clearly. I could go for it and just let's say hope that something will show up, but it feels a little bit irresponsible. So let's play queen c2 first. Now g6 is the only move to defend against the mate, but then this knight looks quite sad. But it's no direct win, so it's a little bit less than what I wanted or what I was dreaming of. But it's quite a dominating position nevertheless. Here I play bishop a2 in order to threaten this pawn, because now this is pinned by the bishop on a2. And here very often, like the most natural defensive move would be bishop e6. That's sort of the automatic solution, but here it doesn't work because the knight is hanging. So I'm basically not sure how black is intending to defend. So knight e7 is played. Very logical. Maybe intending to play bishop e6 on the next move. But now, with so many pieces in play, it simply has to work. Some tactic simply has to work. That's the logic of chess. Because we might get confused very often by concrete lines and concrete calculations and so on, but we shouldn't forget that that logic is actually common. Like it almost always, I mean, chess almost always works in a logical way. So here, when I am attacking with all these pieces, also I can bring my rook, and black with the king side with f takes e6, with the pawn on h6, the weakness on g6. It's simply too many attackers. So here, actually, it was more logical to play rook e1. That would have been like more, let's say, a little bit more classy, to be honest. But okay, knight e5 I played because I simply couldn't see how black was going to defend. I could also correct my mistake and bring the rook now instead. Now I might even threaten funny moves like knight d7, because queen takes d7, bishop takes e6. And then Elnar Ditske, sack first, think later. Well, I mean, in some sense, yes, but also I would rather say trust your instinct. If it should work, then it probably works. Okay, let's try this move just because it's funny looking. Hitting the rook, but also hitting the pawn on e6. Knight g6 was also very, very tempting. Knight h5. I had many moves to increase the pressure. Knight d7 simply looked a little bit too fun not to be played. But my opponent plays pretty wisely, trying to give back. But now at some point, Or at this point, I should say, like even this is very, very tempting. Let's do it. This time it's not a sacrifice because once black takes, I take here, and due to this pin, I'm winning back the rook. Why I was hesitating slightly is like, is it, am I only winning back the material or will I win even more later on? And my conclusion was that probably I will win something else in the end because black seems a bit overloaded, especially this move queen c6 was very a very nice extra opportunity on the next move. Again, utilizing the fact that the rook is pinned. But actually after queen c8, maybe I have nothing direct. Maybe this was all just a bluff. Because what will happen is that black will move the king, and then this rook is free to move. And then I'm not sure what I will do. Yeah, probably this was unnecessary. Also, I'm running out of time. So I play b3. This is a deep move. So my intention here is once the king moves, I take, and now if black takes with the queen, then I can take on c7. Winning a pawn. I have an extra pawn. And hopefully that should give me some decent chances. Now I didn't want for this pawn on b2 to be hanging by the bishop. Instead it's hanging by the queen, but that looked like a different story. Now I missed this. Whoops. Whoops. If he spots it, I'm losing the game. Luckily, luckily my opponent missed it, but that would have been, yeah, would have been a bit anticlimactic for such a nice game. Yeah, I should be a little bit more careful in the future, perhaps. So let's see. Now I want to play knight e7. But I'm again worried. I'm worried about. Also, I'm running out of time. Wow. Yeah, knight e7. I'm worried that black simply moves the knight, and then I'm not sure if I have any attack or if I just misplaced my pieces. So now I'm going for the sort of safe approach. I'm going to just defend everything, try to win this pawn, try to win some ending. Yeah, super GMs are like us. That's actually it's not even a joke. That's simply the way it is. We miss so many things all the time. You would be very surprised that how often very strong players miss very simple things. That's simply how it goes. My excuse for today is, of course, that I'm streaming and I haven't been streaming for a while, so I'm a little bit out of practice explaining my thoughts while playing. Samsung is saying, congrats for Division 3 runner-up. Yeah, thank you very much. I actually, I don't play a lot online, but actually my most recent online tournament went very well. So I'm quite happy to have finally performed well in an online tournament, which was the recently concluded Champions Chess Tour, where I actually managed to reach the final in Division 3. So let's see. Now my plan is to go here and go for the pawn ending, because I think the pawn ending should be winning for me. I have an extra pawn, and generally 3 against 2 is enough for winning in a pawn ending. So let me check first. Actually, this was probably cleaner. Check. And next move, I will go here. And if I'm allowed, I will go to the pawn ending, and then for sure I'm winning. That's simply game over. But he will go here, or my opponent will go there. And then I'm not sure how I will make progress. Also, as someone kindly pointed out, I do not have that much time left, so probably I should focus. Maybe check. Maybe actually g4 makes sense. G4 would make a lot of sense. It's a risky move, but it's also what is this? Again, G4. Maybe check makes a lot of sense, and then I'm simply not sure. I think objectively now black defended well, and it should be a draw. That's basically my take on the situation. But I will of course try until the last chance, or until my time runs out, most probably actually. So let's see. Now I want to go here. Pawn ending, I should be able to win in 13 seconds. Oof. Ah. 6 seconds. Let's go. Will I have to repeat, or should I try to win? At least I will be able to collect the final pawn. That's clear. I had to collect the pawn because otherwise I would have gotten flagged. That was not very very impressive. But basically, I think yeah, it looked very nice until some moment. Here, probably it was like some one of these lines with the sacrifice. I think should have worked something like here, and now maybe e6 followed by some check, or maybe take and some queen g6 or something like that. Or actually here knight h5 also makes a lot of sense. Maybe knight h5 is the cleanest way, because white cannot take it. So yeah, black cannot take it because there is checkmate. So yeah, but then at some point, yeah, and when I didn't do this, okay, this is still looks very, very promising. Maybe rook e1, as I mentioned. Then black started to defend incredibly well. Probably this was a bit materialistic to take on e6. So queen c6, for instance, instead. But yes, take here. And this move, I mean, queen c8 was very nice, and then simply playing, getting out of the pin. All this was very, very nicely done for black. Also to take on b3, it looks dangerous, but yeah, only this moment, the queen b1 check, we should not forget to point out for completeness sake that this was even winning for black. But here, yeah, I mean, I was expecting to cruise to a victory with the weak black king and so on, but yeah, my opponent defended very, very well. Also, this key move a5. Without a5, I would attack this at the same time attack the black king, but now black managed to liquidate. And yeah, okay, I'm a pawn up. I have some chances, but black defended. Yeah. I don't know if I here, okay, here probably the king should go here because king f7 now. Check, and the black king would have to run out. But yeah, this is some minor detail, and here, yeah. Objectively speaking, without any doubt, the draw. So yeah, very nice defense by my opponent. Well done. Thank you for the game. So let's try from the black side. So as I mentioned previously, in my last couple of games, for instance, against Vishwanathan Anand, former world champion, I did play the system with bishop c5 and then putting the knight on e7, but that's not very traditional. So this time I will go for the most traditional main lines. This is the old main line of the Ruy Lopez. So this is something that I have played many times as both white and black. And again, my opponent nowadays they often play like this. It's also what I recommend in my course for a slightly different move order. But the traditional line was h3, after which black chooses between knight a5, the Chigorin defense, and knight b8, the Breyer. Those are the two main choices, or the side set with bishop b7. But both of these moves, which we will also see in the game, they are played with the intention of playing the pawn to c5. So with the knight on c6, this pawn cannot move. But by playing knight a5, of course, if allowed, black really wants to grab the bishop. And once it moves, black plays c5, and now if necessary, the knight can simply retreat to c6, which is, I think, what I will do. And with the pawn on c5, the situation is completely different because now it's very hard for white to push in the center with d4. So here, there's always the question how to develop. Here I will play h6, bishop e6. And I said in the previous game that this bishop on e6 is often not doing too much there. But that was in a little bit of a different situation. Here, I'm optimistic about actually being able to play d5. So I'm a little bit more ambitious than in the previous position. And that's why the bishop on e6 is a bit... It has a bit more sense to it than in the previous example, let's say. d5 immediately white takes and the pawn on e5 is weak. That's not something that black should be looking for. But that's something black should be looking for, but it's not something that looks like it is working at the moment. So I should prepare it. So one way is to go here and here. Another is queen c7, bring this rook. It's all about bringing as many pieces as possible to the game. a4 makes a lot of sense. Trying to at least entertain the possibility of opening up. I will bypass. And I do that in this situation. I'm weakening this square. That is the main downside of the pawn going to b4. But this square is usually used by a knight. But the knight on d2, which uses the square on c4, is already on g3. So it's far away from c4. So that's why white now chooses another plan. And this, now it's getting interesting and complicated. So now I need to think. So actually what I want to do, I don't want to take twice because then it looks a bit passive. I'm actually considering whether I can play b3. It's one of the typical let's say, antidotes to what white is doing here. But it's always a question whether it works or not. I will try it and see what happens. So the idea is to lure white's pieces away from the defense of the pawn on d4. And then I will try to grab the central pawn instead. And that is supposed to be more valuable than the flank pawn. A central pawn is almost always more valuable. Okay, white obliges. Interesting. Now we will get a very sharp game, which is always very nice. Something I enjoy. Takes, I will take with the pawn. I'm expecting white to play knight f5. And then sort of recapturing the pawn by the knight. Okay, not played. Maybe actually what white did is even better. Now I have to think carefully because basically if I let white take the pawn on d4, just sort of gobble it up, then white will be a pawn up. I will have nothing. But I actually had this question earlier from one of the viewers. Like, are we not concerned about the development of the king side, of the queen side as white in the Ruy Lopez in general? Because very often the bishop on c1 and the rook on a1 stays there for a very long time. And yes, it's we are like, we need to take this fact into account, let's say. And what we need to do as white is we need to be careful so that the opposition does not open up in an unfortunate way, like before we are ready for it. And as we see now in the center, the pawns are beginning to disappear. It's been beginning to open up. And here it seems to me like white is lacking the development a little bit. And I will try to utilize it by knight b4. This is now entering a concrete stage. But I think the general thoughts are the more interesting and more, let's say, relevant for educational purposes. So the tactical idea was, if white took the pawn, then knight c2 would create a fork. And now if white didn't take, I'm able to save my d pawn and again renew the threat of knight c2. This is still very far from clear. Okay, knight bishop d2. Now knight c2. I think I'm just winning an exchange. But white could have played knight d4, preventing knight c2, and it would still be a very complicated fight. But here, after knight c2, yeah, white will get one pawn, most probably for the exchange, but it should not be enough. I play bishop f8 in order to open up for the rook, so that the e-pawn is hanging. If white had more stability, let's say, how even to imagine it, if this knight already had captured and one knight was on d5, the other knight was defending the d5 knight, then white would have decent compensation for the exchange. But here, because then my rooks would be quite passive and they would not do too much. But here, with the extra exchange, an exchange is a rook for a bishop or a knight. If you are able to open up the position, then the rooks will become very, very powerful. And this material advantage will be very important. And this, I think, is one of those cases. Now my pieces are really coming to life. So let's see. Queen takes d5. I'm guessing that this pawn on d3 will be lost. But it doesn't matter so much because my rooks, as long as the rooks are active, it should be good enough. This one was slightly annoying because I don't want to allow the double pawns on the on f6. That would be, maybe it's possible actually to allow it, but it feels a little bit sad. But on the other hand, white is now threatening to take. But yeah, shouldn't be that big of a concern. I think I have numerous. But the point, I mean, basically what, like the general thing is that even if white wins the pawn on d3 for free, the position is still like it would still be very, very bad for white because my rooks would still be way too strong and I would still be having a material advantage. Samsung girl is asking what the pawn push with the d5 that we discussed earlier would accomplish. And I guess we'll get back to that after this game. I will go to the position in question and try to elaborate a little bit on the various plans. Because this is, of course, not primarily about the tournament in itself. It's more about us trying to understand more about the Ruy Lopez in general. Me trying to explain some of the things. But here, yeah, basically here, as you can see, the rooks and my activity is simply way too much. White does not have any counterplay. Queen takes is not possible because rook takes e1. knight takes is not possible because mate, and if white doesn't take, then there are all sorts of threats. So yeah, it's very understandable resignation. So let's go back actually. Because let's say a position like this one, we can take it from actually either color, but let's say from the black side now. So yeah, what white is in what white wants to do in the long run, there are two possible plans. Let's say we start from the white side because that's the most familiar. So there are two possible plans, like overarchingly for white in this kind of position. One, and the most common, the most natural, is at some point to step forward in the center. That gains a lot of space. If allowed, you can step even further or take on e5 depending on circumstances. But generally speaking, white is trying to grab space, and then later on, wait, what happened now? How do I reach my previous games? Yeah, this one. Sorry about that. I'm still not too experienced. Yeah, so white is trying to play d4 and grab some more space with d5, and then the advantage of this. Okay, the reason why this space advantage is so important. Let's say we say get something like this. So first of all, the knight had to move. It had to be pushed away. So the knight is now on a bad square. Doesn't matter where it go. The squares, they're all bad. But then secondly, also now with the space advantage, white has a lot of freedom of movement. And this is very, very important. This is basically the explanation for why in general a space advantage is very nice. So if we imagine that white decides, I want to attack on the king side, then we can move, for instance, this knight here, and the queen can come to f3. Maybe we can move this knight here or this knight here. This rook can easily be lifted. This bishop can take on h6, as we saw in one of my previous games. So it's easy for, even this bishop can come. Let's say if we go knight f5, white black takes, we take with the pawn. Then this bishop is already also quite active. So it's easy for white to bring a lot of pieces to the king side. It's easy because there is a lot of space. There is a lot of room, lots of squares, for instance, rook e3. But for black, it's much harder because black doesn't have all these squares. Like for instance, this rook, like I'm lifting this rook, like, or even that rook. How do you get this rook over to the king side? There is simply no space. You can get this bishop to f8, maybe to defend, or to f6. But then you have this bishop, you have this knight, you have this rook, even the queen. It's hard for black to bring the pieces over from one side to another. And if all of them are there, maybe white decides to play a4 and try to open up on the a file. And then black wants to this rook to keep fighting for the a file, be able to bring it over. And that's also not so easy to do because there are many pieces in the way. So it's basically very hard to switch pieces from one side to the other. And a very strong white player from the white side in the Ruy Lopez would be like exploiting this fact very much. Like to be able to switch from one side to the other and play on both sides. This is a very important strategic concept, playing on both wings. So if we go back and we change the board, it's, let's say, black play. And the question actually was why black wants to play d5. I was talking about how I want to prepare d5 as black. And actually the main reason is simply I want to do it before white plays d4. Because then I'm not running the risk of ending up without space. So after d4, yes, it's possible to take everything. Let's say something like this. But then this pawn is a little bit backwards. It's a little bit isolated. It's not defended by another pawn. Basically here we can say that white has the better pawn structure. There is another term for this, which is quite popular in chess education, and that is the term pawn islands. Or basically it means pawn, like group of pawns that can defend each other. So here, these three pawns, they can defend each other. Like, let's say we go here, so they are defended. These two are defended. White has these two. And then these four can all defend each other, kind of. Let's say we go here, and this pawn defends everything. But this pawn is isolated, nothing can defend it, and that's an isolated pawn and a slightly weak pawn. It can, it's not the end of the world, and it can maybe move forward at some point and so on. That's another story. But in general, white is having slightly the better structure. So there is simply no good reaction to d4. Therefore, the reaction has to be to play d5 before white plays d4. That would be at least the dream. Then this is, of course, chess, and we are not getting what we want. Sometimes we cannot prevent the opponent's ID and so on. But basically, I'm playing d5 in order to prevent white from playing d4. And also, if, let's say, d5 is played, it could be possible to play d4, and then black is the one with the space advantage. That could also be useful. And then black could be trying to utilize the same, let's say, logics and same IDs. So, yeah, very important to fight for the space, but also very important to do it at the right moment, because if we do it too early, then maybe white takes. If bishop or knight takes, then the pawn on e5 is hanging. And if queen takes, well, it looks a little bit shaky with the queen in the center. For instance, a move like bishop b3. The queen has to move, but it also has to keep defending the pawn on e5. And now if white takes, then we don't want this structure. This is actually, these two pawns will never be able to defend each other. So this is quite shaky. And if queen takes, then the queen is in this pin. So for instance, d4, one of the possible moves. Not so clear exactly how this like pans out concretely on a move by move basis, let's say, but it's clear that black will have to be very careful because there are some threats and the queen is quite vulnerable. So it's all about timing, and it's a very difficult thing to learn this timing and get it right. And there are so many nuances, but that's part of the Ruy Lopez. That's part of why the opening is so interesting, because we cannot study it for 10 minutes and then we know everything. That would not be, then it would not be played on high level, let's say. So yeah, this sort of general, let's say, strategic considerations is what I try to put my emphasis on in the course that I created. I try to explain why we make all of the moves that we make, like not only explain which move you should make, but all the time try to focus on why and try to understand the position. Also, something that I really tried to do a lot was to look at the position from both sides, because I think there is this danger when creating a course from one side, that we only look at the position from one side of the board and focus exclusively on that. And I think it's much more useful, especially from a, let's say, educational perspective, to try to always imagine the positions from both sides of the board. So both for you and your opponent. What does my opponent want? What is their dream, and are their ideas and so on, and try. Then of course it makes it easier to prevent them. So that's another thing that I emphasized a lot. Now I'm very confused, because now my opponent played something called the Janisch gambit, or the Schliemann gambit. Let's see. Let me, here, this move. This is the Schliemann or Janisch. And in my course, I recommend treating the gambits like, let's say, relatively conservatively. I just have to make a move, because otherwise the game will, I think, abort. But we can go back. Like, to not go, let's say the opponent wants to play a gambit, something very sharp, something very specific. There is a lot of theory. Generally, my approach to studying openings, and especially for creating courses, is to go for solid and robust things where memorization is not the most important factor. So I try to just get a healthy position, not like without ambition. Like, we still have some, let's say, strategic grounds for optimism. We are probably strategically better, but we are not trying to, let's say, refute the opening in the most strict sense. We are just we want a healthy position with some advantage, maybe not the biggest, but it's good enough. And then we can focus on the other parts of the game. So that's in general my philosophy in the against the sidelines, let's say. Then we can focus on the other lines and on other parts of chess as well, of course. So here, basically without the f pawn, black has an open f file, so some let's say attack or some play. But on the other hand, the king is a long-term problem because without one of the defenders of the king, it can become quite a lot harder to. Well, the king can simply become quite a lot weaker in the long run. But here, yeah, I'm not sure because in the course, I don't actually remember what I'm recommending against knight takes e4. Very often, black plays either d6 or bishop c5. This move knight takes e4. It looks very, very risky to me because while black is opening up the e file, opening up a lot before developing. So the e file is now open, and the king is still there. First, the bishop has to move, and then black can castle. And in fact, even that is not so easy to do because, for instance, a move like bishop c4, then black is not able to castle. So it's all quite risky for black. But how to, let's say, punish it in the best way, I don't remember. I don't know. So let's see. Here, I think black really needed to try bishop c5, trying to castle at any cost, and also attacking the pawn on f2. But it looks very shaky. But the move h6, it looks like it looks like queen takes d5 was probably missed by my opponent. It's usually the pawn on d5 is defended by the queen, but now the queen moved to f6, and that's why after queen f6 the pawn is simply undefended, no longer defended by the queen. And without the pawn on d5, then it's all collapsing. Now this knight cannot really be saved, and this king is still stuck in the center, and I think it's just unfortunately for black collapsing. What would I do against bishop c5? Yeah, we can look at it a little bit after the game. I had two options which I didn't decide between yet. One was to play bishop e3, bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, giving the pawn on b2, but claiming that the black king in the center is very, very weak. But the other sharper choice after bishop c5 was actually to give up the pawn on f2 by queen takes d5. And then after bishop takes f2 check, simply move the king. Yes, I am losing the rook, but the knight on e4 is hanging with check, and then I can also pick up the bishop afterwards. So I think I'm winning some material there. So that was, I would have to think a bit more about it, but that was my my two choices. But most probably I would have taken on d5. So yeah, I mean, I guess this knight takes e4 move is simply too risky. Like, you have to be so careful about opening up the position when behind in development. That's always very, very important in the opening stage of the game. But the move f5 in itself, the sort of Yanish or Schliemann gambit, it's risky. It's, let's say, not the best, but it's also not bad. It's been played a lot, especially by one of the players who played it a lot is Timur Rajabov, one of the Azerbaijan's strongest players, former world number 2 or 3, I think, by rating. He played it at the highest level with a decent success, so definitely not a bad line, just a little bit riskier than what players at the top level generally wants. But you have to play it well. So here, yeah, my opponent tried this intermediate move rook d8. I could have taken here with a big material advantage, but I wanted to win the piece for free. And after this, actually, my intention was to take with the knight. So temporarily sacrificing my queen, but then I win both the queen, but then afterwards also the rook due to the double attack. So yeah, it looks like I'm picking up a lot of material here, like probably a piece and a rook, and that should definitely be enough. Mm, let's take here. Black might actually be able to castle. After bishop e7, I don't need to allow castling. Actually, I can also play something like bishop c4, which is a typical theme in the Yanish Gambit, and one of the reasons why it isn't so popular, why it's a bit risky at least, that the king is quite likely to be stuck in the center for a long time. Mm. Mm. But on that, yeah, it's of course very tough without like being a piece down. That's usually uh, makes the situation pretty hopeless, and I think this is not really an exception. Mm. Actually, bishop b c4 was not quite necessary because taking would also leave the bishop on e7 hanging. But okay, it's there are many roads to Rome in such a nice position. Mm. So if you want to play this f5 system, you can do it immediately. Let me just see what he did. What they did. Let's see. Let's go knight e5, trying to keep as much of an attack as possible. Also, trading was, of course, tempting to just win in a more technical fashion, but now I want to win. Like go for the attack as quickly as possible. But if you want to play something connected to f5, I think one of the better ones is actually. Oops, let me see. I will show it maybe after this. I think I can just collect. To play a6, bishop a4, and now d6, and after c3 to play f5, to play it on move 5 instead, the so-called siesta variation, which was actually played recently. I think Hans Niemann, amongst others, had a game in the Sharjah Masters just a couple of days ago. So it's still very much a line that is relevant on the highest level. So the siesta variation is not that bad. I think that's a more healthy way to push f5 early on in the Spanish. There is also a6, bishop a4, f5 on move 4. Also another interesting one, but that one is a little bit more double-edged and honestly too risky for black from at least from my perspective. So, but these f5 lines are always very confusing. And actually, after the game, I will highlight a memory rule for those of you who are studying the Ruy Lopez, which is quite nice actually. But we'll do it after the game because it will be a little bit too complicated to take while my game is still in progress. But for those of you who are really nerdy about theory, you will love that rule for sure. It's one of my own favorite memory rules in chess openings, actually. Yeah, here now, knight g6, I'm able to win one more piece, so now it's 3 pieces, but also the attack is still ongoing, so should not be long now. Actually, this was a bit inaccurate. I should have given this check, and after king h7, knight f8, double checkmate is something quite rare, but quite nice. So that was a bit. Maybe I will get a new chance. And someone in the chat already knows the rule. Clitoris. That's sounds like you have studied my course already. That's nice. Because I think I'm maybe the one who invented the rule. So if you know it, you probably must have studied my my one. At least I have never seen it mentioned anywhere else. And now the king is stuck. Okay, thank you for the game. Well thought, but remember to not open up the position too early when you are in the opening stage of the game. Yeah, so basically I was mentioning there is this line, f5 on move 4. There is this line. There is f5 immediately. There is even the line. Let me go back to my game. Games. This one. There is also this one, bishop c5. C3 f5, let's say. So there are so many versions of these f5s, and when I started to play chess more seriously, there was one player in Sweden. I'm from Sweden. One grandmaster called Johnny Hector. Very, very dangerous attacking player. Very, very strong with initiative, but also with a reputation for these risky openings, always playing for the win, also with black. Didn't care that it was too risky or objectively not sound and so on. He just sort of went for it with both colors all the time. And he played a lot of these different f5 versions in the Ruy Lopez. And I was struggling to remember what to do where, because the reactions are not always the same. Sometimes you take, sometimes you push in the center, sometimes you simply play d3 like I did in my game. Sometimes even bishop takes c6 is there. And then I found out that my reactions are that it's possible to systemize them in a very nice way. And that is to look at the number of moves that has been played. And basically now, because this is themed arena, we are starting on move 1. But normally speaking, this would be the third move. Black plays f5 on the third move. And then the rule that I invented is that if the opponent plays f5 on the third move, you put a piece or a pawn on the third rank as white. So here, this is what I did in my game. This is rank, the third rank, d3. You can also, if you want to play knight c3, that's the other good move. But they are both on the third rank because black played f5 on the third move. And if black includes this and plays f5, the only thing we have to do to remember our reaction is to look what number is the move. And now, because of this inclusion of a6, this is now move number 4. And that means that we should put a pawn or a piece to the 4th rank. And in this position, which otherwise would be quite tricky to remember, is it d3? Does it make a difference? Can we maybe take and so on? No, now we know that we should put something on the 4th rank. And knowing that, we don't really have a lot of options. I mean, these two moves, they don't make sense. The knight cannot really move. So the only move that makes sense is d4. And as it's played on the 4th move, we know that that's the way. And if you end up in this position and black plays f5 on move 5, well, then by the same rule, we have to put something on the 5th rank. And again, not that many options. We cannot sacrifice. We simply have no reasonable alternatives to capturing because it's the only move on the 5th rank that makes sense. So that's a nice rule. And as pointed out in the chat, no rule is there is no rule without exception. This is one of the exceptions because black, now it's a themed arena, but if we imagine, let's say, this position on move 2, then after f5, we should not put a pawn, put something on the 2nd rank. That's a bit too early. It would be according to the rule. But yeah, here we have to do something else. For instance, d4 is very, very good. But yeah, it's also all these moves. It's basically reversed King's Gambit, as we pointed, or reversed Vienna, let's say. The Vienna would be the same position with the bishop back on f1, and then d4 is also the main move. So it's of course very logical, all of these moves. I mean, but the reason why d4 here is a little bit less, let's say, impressive than in the Vienna is in this line where black takes. We take with the knight and e5. Now knight takes e5, d takes e5. This is actually pretty good for white with the bishop back on f1. It's really good. But in this specific situation, because we have actually gained one move for free as white, we won the tempo, black has the possibility to play c6, hitting the bishop. And if the bishop moves, let's say here, or to e2, then black can play queen a5 check. So picking up the pawn on e5 on the next move. So actually, this is one of those strange situations where we have an extra move, so it should be even better than usual, but actually it's worse because black is the one gaining a move on our bishop. So this just goes to show that chess is a very concrete game, and it's very good with these rules of thumbs, and that they usually apply, but there are also many exceptions. Exactly, always calculate, exactly. That's a good rule of thumb. So let's see. We have some time for one. Now let's actually move. We don't really. I think the arena is closing in 4 minutes, so not that much time. Let's see. One of the players we haven't seen before. But this, black started by playing knight d4. Very interesting. This is called the bird's opening, but the bird opening for black, not for white. And this is another of those situations where maybe the bishop would have been better on f1, because then black, maybe the pawn on e5 would be. I'm actually not sure about that. Yeah, the point is after this, the structure is a little bit like there is a double pawn. What happened? The game finished. The game finished. But yeah, the double pawns is a little bit of a weakness for black, but on the other hand, the center is kept closed and black has some potential to develop the bishop to c5. So, but okay, let's see another game that is still ongoing. And now also, because it's only 3 minutes left, people are beginning to play a little bit less sound and a little bit more, let's say, in order to win as quickly as possible. Because there is also prizes in the tournament, prizes at stake. I think you are getting a gift card for Chessable, so you could use it. For instance, I'm not saying you should, but you could use it to get my course with the voucher you can win in the tournament. So that's one possibility. So I guess they are really trying to squeeze in the last few points of the tournament. But let's see one of the more normal games. What is this? This is a long game. Again, won by checkmate. It's hard to follow. Again, black played this move d6, which I mentioned earlier. It's the most common move at club level play. And very rare at higher level, because after the move d4, which was the reaction which we saw earlier, then black, due to the pressure on the pawn, has to give up the center. And after knight takes d4, bishop d7, white simply has more space. And as we discussed, more space is something that simply is, it's simply an advantage. So white is simply better here. In this specific game, actually, white took with the bishop instead of the knight, which is quite interesting. And the point is to keep the knight on d4. Keep the strong knight on the board. So, and still settling black with a double pawn. Knight c3, knight bishop e7, short castle, knight f6. This is all very normal. White is actually playing it quite well. Basically, from white's perspective, if we switch colors. From white's perspective in such a position, where we have the space advantage and we have a long-term advantage due to the pawn structure, this is not something that will disappear quickly. Black is not threatening to get rid of the pawns. So it's a long-term advantage. That means that as white, we should try to play slowly and try to stabilize and just improve bit by bit, because this advantage will, if given time, just increase. Because the long-term advantage, no need to rush things. And that's why white plays so calmly h3, rook e1, overprotecting the center, now activating the bishops. And as black, it's quite hard to do anything. And it explains the next move, because now black played knight h7, which looks strange. It moves away from the center, but there is at least some possibilities for active play later on with f5. Very risky, of course, always to move the f1, but at least something to maybe hope for later on. But basically, I wouldn't say that the move. Okay, by the way, I should just quickly mention that Sicilian Forever won. Congratulations. Blunderfest second, and Mattis third. So congratulations. Hope you are making good use of your Chessable gift cards. Hopefully very nice. But let's switch back to to chess. Knight h7. In order to play f5, because there is simply no other active plan for black. d5, white can play e5 or take. Both options are good. And c5 is possible. But after the knight moves somewhere, it's hard to, let's say, see the next active step for black. What black actually does, if they end up in such a position, is bishop c6, maybe rook e8, bishop f8. Play slowly and try to apply some pressure on the pawn on e4. That's probably the best way, but it's still quite passive and still not a lot of counterplay. So that's why this knight h7 was played, but it's a little bit, I think, too drastic. Queen f3, rook b8. And now, with the pawn hanging, I guess white should just have played something like b3, keeping this strong knight on d4. Next move, maybe rook a d1. And it's a very nice and simple position for white to play. So where does the c1 bishop belong? I talked earlier in the closed positions that the bishop was quite active on c1 already. But in this situation, with the center a bit more opened, we do want our next rook on d1. We do want to increase our control, for instance, over the e5 square, over the center in general. And therefore, it makes sense to develop the bishop to f4. Also, it's a nice square because usually black has a pawn on e5 that can attack it. But now there is no such pawn. So yeah, this is basically the setup for white, rook a d1, and then just see what happens. Enjoy the space advantage and the lack of counterplay. So instead, white played knight b3. It was immediately hit, bishop g5 and f5. And now there is some counterplay along the f file. White would like to take with the knight, but the knight is no longer there. So black is opening up for the two bishops, very nicely played. And after e5, actually, this did not work out so well after e5 for black. It's a nice idea, but maybe the position is simply not good enough for it. But yeah, here, just recapturing would give white a very nice edge. This also looks quite strong. But yeah, some tactics happened, and finally, white was much better and won the game. So knight h7 followed by f5, nice, let's say, creative idea for counterplay. But even after this, let's say, slightly dubious move, knight b3, it didn't work out too well. But yeah, congratulations for Sicilian Forever, despite ending up in this pretty lousy opening position and losing the last game, winning the tournament. Very nice. Congratulations also to all the others. And for you, those of you who just listened, or those of you who played Andy's, and I hope you have enjoyed the content, and that you have actually learned something, or even quite a lot. It was my pleasure to try to explain to you a little bit more, get you a little bit more familiar with the Ruy Lopez for both colors. If you want to, of course, you can also consider purchasing my my course on Chessable. I made a course entirely on the Ruy Lopez, focusing on the explanations and understanding of the positions, both in the opening and the middle game for both sides. So if you liked today's session, probably you will like the course as well. It's up to you. Hope you enjoyed, and well, I'm also hoping it will not be my last time. Thank you very much for today.
Looking for new ways to enjoy chess? Check out our schedule of chess.com community events today. Mondays, play rapid opening roulette and expand your opening repertoire with a new opening each month. Tuesdays, compete against other Untitled players in Untitled Tuesday. Battle your way to the top in Arena Kings on Wednesdays. And finish the week off each Saturday with the blistering Community Bullet Brawl. All happening in the Community Club on chess.com. Looking for new ways to enjoy chess? Check out our schedule of chess.com community events today. Mondays, play rapid opening roulette and expand your opening repertoire with a new opening each month. Tuesdays, compete against other Untitled players in Untitled Tuesday. Battle your way to the top in Arena Kings on Wednesdays. And finish the week off each Saturday with the blistering Community Bullet Brawl. All happening in the Community Club on chess.com. Looking for new ways to enjoy chess? Check out our schedule of chess.com community events today.